Hello everybody. Okay, so this week we're going to look at evidence and reasoning to support a central idea. We've already talked a little bit about central idea and about topics, and now we're going to put all that together into a nice paragraph explaining and supporting our central idea. And to do that, we need to include a few things. So with the central idea, we need some reasoning, some context, and specific and relevant evidence. And I'm going to explain all those terms during this video. So we're going to look today at selecting what is the best evidence to support your central idea, how to support it with reason and context. We'll look at a few examples, and then I'm going to explain assignment number 12, which is practicing all this with the example of nosedive. So, a central idea paragraph, there are a number of steps to put this all together. Firstly, you identify topics in the story. Remember, a topic is just a general subject, what a story is about. And once you've identified a few topics, you've made some inferences, you've annotated your text, you've chosen some topics, and then you're going to choose just one, or maybe sometimes two. And then based on that topic that you chose, you write or articulate a central idea. Remember, central idea is just what the writer is trying to communicate to the reader. What is this story about? What is the writer trying to say? And the bit we're going to focus on today is selecting what is the best evidence, the best way of showing that our central idea is a good one, and also explaining that evidence with reasoning and context. So let's start with evidence. It's really important, first of all, to choose the best piece of evidence. In the text you read, there's going to be lots of things where you're going to think to yourself, well, I can use that piece of evidence, or I can use that piece of evidence. Okay, so it may be that for a topic, I know, love or war or whatever, there's going to be 3 or 4 parts of the text, quotes or things that happen that you could use for evidence. And you want to choose the best one. And the best one is really the one that is the most relevant. So that means that it's the one that is most directly related to your topic. So if your topic is about love, you have to make sure that your evidence is directly related to love in some way. And it also has to be specific. So it may be that the quote you chose is, I don't know, a paragraph long, and it doesn't just talk about love, but it talks about a bunch of other things. Okay, so you want your evidence to be specific, and when you're quoting from a text or using evidence, you really want to focus only on a few sentences or a few lines that are directly related, just related to the topic that you're focusing on. Let's look at an example. So in the ruins, you remember this text about those people trying to survive by eating each other. We read this a couple of weeks ago. So first of all, right, I chose the topic of survival. And then I thought, well, what's this story trying to say about survival? And I came up with this central idea. People will do anything to survive. Alright, nice and short. And then I got to think, well, what's some evidence in the text that supports that central idea? And you could have chosen a few things here, but the one I chose, nice and short again, is where the narrator says, I was going crazy with hunger. So, is that the best evidence? Well, I think we could say there are other good pieces of evidence, but it's pretty good. Is it relevant? Yeah, it's relevant to my central idea, right? Because it's talking about people doing anything to survive, and we know this guy is crazy with hunger, and we know what he's going to do. And is it specific? Yeah, because it's just related to that topic of survival. Okay, Let's look at a bad piece of evidence. Okay, so In the Ruins is very short. We could say that all of the text could support the topic of survival. But if you chose this piece of evidence, right? I found a few bits of wood and I made a fire in the ruins and started roasting a piece of the meat. The doctor sat on the ground doing things to the stump of his leg. Well, there's a lot of things going on there which aren't directly relevant or related to the topic of survival. So it's not really the best evidence here. Is it relevant? Well, there are some bits that are relevant, right? It talks about the doctor, it talks about the stump of his leg, and we know what he's going to do with the stump of his leg. It talks about the fire, but it's not really very specific to the evidence or specific to the topic here. You know, it talks about the ruins and the wood and the fire. Well, we don't really need all that stuff. Let's look at the example from Cargo. If you remember, Cargo is that short film we saw where we had that guy and he's turning into a zombie and he wants to protect his child. I could have gone with survival again, right, as a topic, but I chose endurance. This man will do lots of things to be able to ensure that his child will be safe. And the central idea that I based on endurance is we ultimately define our future no matter our difficult circumstance. So no matter how tough things get, you know, we're always going to do whatever it takes. And the evidence I chose here, now remember this is a film, so my evidence is not going to be a quote, because if you remember in this film, no one actually talks. And in general, your evidence doesn't always have to be, if it's in a text, it doesn't always have to be a quote from the text. It could be something that happens in the story. And here, my evidence is just where I talk about the man saving his daughter's life through his selflessness, right? He will do anything for her, and his strategic thinking. Now, I could have made some more about that evidence, but I'm just going to keep it short here. So is this the best evidence? Maybe it's pretty good. It's relevant, right? It's relevant to my central idea, and it's specific. So we've looked at choosing the best evidence, and now we're going to think about how can we explain that evidence with reasoning and context. So the important thing about evidence is you don't just drop it into your writing, right? It's not just taking a quote and then just putting it into a paragraph and not saying anything about that quote. Okay, because then it doesn't really make sense to the reader. Okay, so you've got to support it almost like you're putting an envelope around it, right? With reason, and reasoning is just basically explaining what your evidence means to the reader, and context. And context is something that we sometimes forget about when we're writing about central idea. It's that kind of background information to the story that will help the reader understand what's going on. Now, you should always assume when you're writing these central ideas that the reader or the viewer maybe has not seen or read what you're talking about, and that's why we need context. It gives us that information that we need to make sense of what's going on. So we're going to look at a bunch of examples. Okay, so here we have In the Ruins, all right? And I start my paragraph off with my central idea. And my central idea, remember, is a universal lesson. It's a message, or it's the insight. It's what the writer's trying to say, and I've written that in an academic way. Okay, so it's a very general message. So my central idea here is In the Ruins by Roald Dahl conveys the central idea that people will do anything to survive. Okay, and then I've got to think about my reasoning. I've got to explain how this story or how this text specifically demonstrates my thinking. And I wrote And a good way of starting this is by saying something like, this is demonstrated in the text by, and then explaining it. So here I've got, this is demonstrated in the text by the narrator and other characters who are willing to become cannibals and offer their own bodies as food in order to keep on living. Okay, so I'm reasoning, I'm explaining my evidence here. And you'll notice that my evidence, which is the part in red, is kind of like in the middle of the context. Okay, so it doesn't really matter where you're going to put your evidence here. You could put it in the reasoning, you could put it in the context. Also, your context could come before the reasoning. Okay, it doesn't really matter, but wherever you put your evidence, it needs to be explained. As I said, you don't just drop it in. So I've actually got my evidence here in red as part of the context. And the context, remember, is just that background information. So I explain, in the text, after an apocalyptic event, there are only a few survivors left, including the narrator, who says, I was going crazy with hunger. And this is a quote from the text. You'll notice I've got little quote marks there. And I've also explained who is the speaker here, who's saying this, and it's the narrator. He eats the leg of a doctor, another survivor, and is joined by a little girl. They will survive by slowly eating each other. So this context is really explaining what's going on in the story for the reader. It helps to set up my evidence, it helps to set up my central idea. Another example, so here's Cargo. Okay, I've got my central idea first. Yolanda Ramke and Ben Howling's short film Cargo, they're the people who made the film, conveys the central idea that we ultimately define our future no matter our difficult circumstance. So that's about the topic of endurance. And then my reasoning, this is demonstrated in the film because the main character is able to overcome the difficult circumstance of saving his daughter's life through his selflessness and strategic thinking. So here in my reasoning, I've actually reasoned or explained my evidence. My evidence is the part in red here. And then I give a little context, a little background information. In the film, where there seems to have been a zombie apocalypse, the main character contracts the zombie virus from his infected wife and realizes he must bring his daughter to a safe haven in order to protect her from himself before he transforms. And you'll remember he puts that meat in front of him to make sure that he doesn't eat his daughter instead of himself. Okay, so this just really gives some background information to explain my central idea, to explain my reasoning. Let's look at one last example. Text we looked at last week, The Pedestrian. So my central idea, The Pedestrian by Ray Bradbury, shares the insight. So I've kind of explained this in a slightly different way. I'm talking about an insight here, that if we become addicted to technology, we will lose our souls. A lot of you had a very similar central idea for this text. And then I explain what that means. This is demonstrated in the text by the difference between Leonard Mead, a solitary figure who is full of life, and the nameless figures inside their homes watching TV. So I'm really explaining here how my central idea is shown in the text. And it's shown by the difference that the writer sets up between Leonard Mead, and again, I talked last week, or this week rather, about when you're giving the name of somebody, give their full name. So the difference between Leonard Mead, who we know is full of life, and then these people who are in their houses, we never get their names, who are just watching TV. And then I go on to give a little context, right, explaining what's going on in this story. In the text, Mead goes out walking all day and night and comments on the tomb-like houses he passes where people sat like the dead. There's my evidence. Okay, now I've just picked out, you'll notice, little parts from the text. Those two quotes, tomb-like, sat like the dead, they're in the same paragraph. I didn't include all of the paragraph. I just picked little bits out from that paragraph that I could drop in, put into my context so it makes sense. addiction to watching TV has become so prevalent or so common that in 10 years, Mr. Mead or Mead has never seen another person outside. Okay, so for the assignment today, okay, so this is assignment number 12, you're going to write a paragraph, essential idea from Nosedive. So first of all, you're going to choose a topic, and then you're going to write a paragraph. So first of all, you're going to write your academic essential idea based on the topic you chose, and then just like the examples we looked at, you're going to support it with evidence, with reason, and with context. Make sure that your central idea is academically written, so it's general, right? Use the examples that I just looked at as models for your own paragraph, and I'm going to include one of those models in the assignment for you to look at and to copy how I did things. And then remember to explain your evidence, don't just drop it into the paragraph.